So, just want to say first, welcome and good morning to everyone who's new to the session that didn't attend the first session this morning. My name is Sunny, and I am the current chair of the Doctoral and Early Career Research Committee. And I've been the chair for about 2 years now. So many of you may be familiar with the DECR, but in case this is your first event with us, we're a volunteer board that drives the Association for Art History's doctoral and early career research events and initiatives. So through our network, we're able to provide a support system and platforms for current PhD students and early career researchers. So with this professional development days, our thinking was essentially to provide DECRs with practical, kind of more hands-on career development skills. So if you've been here with us the last couple of sessions, we had a curatorial roundtable, a session on how to write a grant and bursary application, and then this morning on copyright image permissions. And then this session in particular is looking at how to write an academic CV or cover letter, specifically tailored to working in kind of visual culture and art history. So this panel, as advertised, is for individuals seeking guidance and best practices on how to write their academic CV and cover letter. And you'll have the opportunity to speak to and learn from members of the Higher Education Committee who are part of the Association for Art History, so one of the working groups for the AAH. Our structure for this session will first start with some presentations from our lovely HEC members, and we'll take a quick 5-minute break, and then we'll lead into a workshop session and Q&A. So I'll just quickly introduce the HEC members, and they'll tell you a little bit more about the HEC when it comes to that time. So we have Stephanie O'Rourke, who is a senior lecturer in art history at the University of St. Andrews. Melissa Percival, who has worked for much of her career at the University of Exeter and has spent shorter periods teaching and researching in the US, France, and Germany. And last but not least, Jack Hartnell, who is Associate Professor of Art History in the Department of Art History and World Art Studies at UEA. So without further ado, take it away, guys.
Thank you so much, Sunny. It's great to be here. I'm aware that these things often, function a slightly Zoom camera off kind of moment. But if anyone fancies switching their camera on so we can produce a bit more of a workshop environment and see each other and we can know that there are others out there, then that would be great. Please feel free to do so. So just briefly, Sunny asked me to say a word or two about the HEC. So we are a kind of counterpart to the group that Sunny and the rest of her team run, which is the Higher Education Committee of the Association for Art History. And we sort of have twin goals, really. One is to advise the association on matters relating to higher education, so shifts and changes in art history's position within higher education, but also what is happening in the general higher education landscape. But it's also, I think, a much more active position or kind of an active group who are really trying to undertake serious advocacy on behalf of the discipline and its promotion, its support in response to those changes and shifts in higher education and the higher education landscape. And it's been really nice to do lots of work with the DECR committee and to see how their remit for doing all sorts of interesting things, supporting colleagues in a particular early career moment within the field intersects really nicely with a lot of our advocacy agendas, and it's really a pleasure to be here. So what we were going to do, as Sunny said, is kind of really take, I guess, 3 brief aspects for the first now a bit more than a half hour or so of the session. I just wanted to say a few comments to frame things. Melissa's then going to lead on talking about CVs and their role, and Steph on cover letters. But really, rather than thinking about these 2 quite specific types of document, which, as you'll see, can be very changeable actually within the kind of landscape of what one might want to be doing with art history and art history PhD or a set of higher art history degrees. I wanted just to set the scene a little bit, really actually from some personal experience. I had the fun opportunity just this morning to run through a folder that I have of job applications that I've made, which include CVs and cover letters. I found out, whether it's to my horror or to my, I don't know, the opposite of horror, we'll see. I've applied for 31 jobs since 2014. The first in 2014, the last most recently is this last academic year, and there is a combination of things, not just permanent faculty positions in art history. That's where my kind of that's where my current role is, but postdocs, fellowships, both before designed for both, I guess, what we would call tenured and untenured faculty, so postdoctoral fellowships, but also fellowships that would take me as a secondment outside of my current role and return me to it, and museum jobs as well. So a range. I've got 3 of those 31, including the current one that I'm in now. So on the one hand, I think this suggests actually quite a healthy market in some ways, and 31 jobs over 10 years. The art history is not always seen as the most flourishing set of disciplines, and we know that actually art history is in a tricky time. Well, higher education is in a tricky time more generally, but that's quite a lot of opportunities, I would say. So that's a positive that I want to take of it. And I think another point to make is that if you are interested in continuing to work either in academic art history, in museums, or in any parallel related fields within industry or elsewhere, thinking about applying for jobs, framing your materials, and framing your attitude towards that process is going to be a big part of your history, not just in this moment, but for some time. And in fact, depending on your particular circumstances, will ebb and flow throughout your entire career. I think, therefore, it's worth doing 2 things. The first is strategizing. And really, that's a lot of what we're going to be talking about today, is thinking about how you might shape, especially these 2 documents, a CV and a cover letter in different forms, towards a particular set of jobs as they might come up in over the course of your career. But we're going to talk a lot about that. So I just wanted to briefly mention another aspect, which I think is really positive, which is really kind of important, which is cultivating as far as possible a positive attitude towards the job market. It's certainly a field and a moment which is inevitably absolutely laced through with anxiety, with competition, and working in a small sphere that we're in, a relatively niche set of fields. It's often the case that one is in competition with one's peers, one's friends, not always, but sometimes. And I think as a result for me, I think it's really important for us to do 2 quite practical things to, on an emotional but also practical level, help us through what can be quite a tricky set of circumstances. These are 2 bits of just quite personal advice that I think are important. The first is to really build as far as you can, and this is, I think, something that you will already be involved in, a foundation of friends, colleagues, and mentors that can support you through this process, specifically in relation to things like CV and to cover letters, but more generally in relation to this process. So that is seeking out advice. It's a fantastic sign that you're already here to do just that. To build your networks of peers who are going through similar experiences, but also through your supervisors, through colleagues who you'll meet along the way, people at conferences, people beyond in professional networks, people who can offer advice and experience, and to ultimately support each other in this. Now, it sounds like a really obvious happy clappy kind of approach to this, but I'm 100% certain that the colleagues who have made their way through into really successful and satisfying careers through this process are those who have surrounded themselves with peers who really address this process in a positive way. And I think it's no exaggeration to say that many of us will know our colleagues who inevitably allow their difficulties and the focus of this kind of navigating this tricky system sometimes to get the better of them. I think it's important that we inculcate together a positive attitude towards these things. And that really feeds through, I think, into all sorts of really positive networks. But the second point, and the last point I want to make as well, is to treat the whole process of applying, but especially for jobs, but especially that relating to the CV and to the cover letter, for instance, as an ongoing process, and in particular, a kind of iterative process. So that's to say being adaptable and responsive and creative in how you shift and shape these materials. Because although you may, and I certainly, when I was coming out of my PhD, had quite a fixed sense of who I was, what I come to realize, even looking back at that moment, but especially now, is that I could be, if I wanted to be, many different kinds of academic, let alone different kinds of art historical professional. And I, through some clever thinking, can shift and turn and face my experience into lots of different directions, more than I appreciated at the time. And part of that is to really, again, just to be creative and responsive to this. So treating things, a lot of these two documents we're going to be looking at, as very much a living process. That's to say that these shouldn't be things that you conjure kind of out of nowhere in response to a job application, but that you're thinking about regularly. So thinking every now and again about how you and your work might be differently framed. I'm going for this kind of job, but are there other ones that I spot in jobs.ac.uk that resonate with me a little bit? How might I approach that? I think it's an important thing rather than just producing a narrative in a mad rush in a cover letter. Likewise, and this was some of the best advice I got quite early on in my career, treating your CV in particular as a living document. Melissa's going to come on to the specifics of how to structure them when you're pointing them in the direction of a particular job. But, I have a big document just called Everything CV. It has loads of different sections, some that chime, some that don't. And when I do something, I always try and remind myself, I often forget, but I try as hard as I can to just either drop something into its relevant section or even just have a section at the top that says, to be filed, and just a one line note about something that you've done, because you will be amazed how over the course of your career, just small bits of teaching, small, if you're thinking about an academic, little bits of curatorial work that you're doing, podcasts, public engagement work, all these things, which are actually quite hard to conjure to mind in the moment of putting a CV together. And so having a big long list, which you can then edit, reshuffle, rework, just helps with that sense of creativity. You could say the same thing for interviews, making sure that if you go to an interview for a job after, immediately, no matter how well or how badly, it's gone right down the questions you were asked. Because next time you come to an interview, you'll want to try and remember and you won't be so well placed. So just having that immediate presence of mind to record and to nestle away a lot of these little bits of information in the work that you're doing so that you can then shape it. So essentially, this is developing materials in response to your successes, your failures, but also in response to really your day-to-day life and work as an early career researcher. So those are my two things that I want to share. I'm going to pass on to Melissa. Went on for slightly longer than I meant to, but just building that clear foundation of supportive individuals actively seeking advice on the one hand, and on the other hand, thinking continually and in a kind of iterative way about how you can develop who you are and how you frame that in all sorts of documents. So two obvious points, but really important ones, I think, to start with. Melissa, over to you.
Yeah, well, I agree with everything that's been said so far, which is a good thing. We might not agree on everything that in this session. I think if we do differ, it will be on like points of detail. And I think one of the things that we in prior discussions before coming to meet with you today, what we want to try and do in this session is to say, here's how you do it. Here's a kind of blueprint, but that blueprint is ever changing. So if you can, try not to, we're going to give you detail, but try not to get the impression that if you haven't configured it in exactly that way, then that's wrong, because it is fluid, it is adaptable. So we're trying to give you the best of both worlds here. So yeah, I actually wanted to start with and I if I can manage to share my slides, I wanted to start with the looking at it, a job application process from the other side. As somebody who sat on a lot of job panels for art history, for modern languages, but also right across the humanities, classics, film studies, I've been involved in that process quite a lot, and I guess what I felt that was maybe valuable was a sort of perspective on what's going on behind the scenes, what's going on when I don't hear something, what are people actually looking for. So my first slide, if I can get to it, hold on a second, has a few of those sort of reflections. We're done with it. Sorry for the oversharing here. That's not it. Sorry. I just had it before. How's that? Can people see that? What are potential employers thinking?
No, you're not sharing yet.
Oh dear.
It's
You
okay.
could just send.
I've got the slide last
Um,
yesterday. Let me.
hold on a sec. I'm gonna go in for it again.
I've got it up on my computer if that works for
Oh,
you.
have you? Thank you. Sorry.
No worries. Let me go ahead and just open this up really quickly. It's just waking up a minute. All right, so should play from start. All right. Oh, is that me that put that up? Yeah. Can you guys see that?
No, it's not sharing.
Okay, 1 second.
Okay, I'm gonna have one more go.
Oh, technology, hey. Okay, wait. Here we go. I think got it. Can we also?
Yep.
Okay, let's try
Okay.
that. Is that better?
That
Great.
works.
Yay. Okay, cool.
Sorry guys, too much nerves. Okay, so this is a bit of a wordy slide, but I think my starting point would be, what is the job that you're applying for? And obviously you'll get quite a lot of clues from the way the job description is framed. But a sort of basic sort of distinction, if you like, is, are you applying for a what we call an open-ended contract? There's no such thing as a permanent job anymore. But you know, as it were, a sort of long-term job, or are you applying for something that is maybe a year or 2 years, or even shorter period than that? And I just wanted to encourage you to think of how employers may view those different types of job, and how you can sort of tailor your approach to those different types of jobs. So of course we would love to be thinking long term all the time. We'd love to give everyone a job that deserves it, but you know, we're in the reality of the current job market. Chances are, if an open-ended job is being advertised, it will have been a very hard-won battle internally to get that job approved, to find the money, to find a willingness to invest in the future of art history, or you know, whatever discipline it's in. So from the employer's side, there is a great deal of, I guess, hope, optimism, that you know, you're really investing in a long-term relationship here with somebody, and so you know, you want to find the right person. Oh, I'm so sorry. For temporary contracts, obviously you want all those things too, in terms of a good colleague, but the time frame is shorter, and I think temporary jobs come often about due to short-term needs quite often. That could be a teaching buyout if a permanent member of staff gets a research grant, for instance, and there's a need to cover the teaching programme. And sometimes these can be advertised quite late on, the notification doesn't come through. And so I think the employer's considerations are framed very differently. In that instance, you want somebody that can hit the ground running, that is capable, that is willing, that is adaptable. And so I would say those are the things to the way to sort of frame your application in terms of the job that is actually being advertised. Another thing to think about, people often feel very keenly the sort of silences, I think, in the, where you're not hearing back from whoever you have applied to. It's a very complex process that goes on behind the scenes, not just what I said before about, obtaining the wherewithal to advertise this job in the first place, but the process of then, receiving CVs, of handling timings, of getting the right people in the room at the right time. There's quite a lot going on behind the scenes. So I think if you can be patient and just sort of understand the complexities, and not sort of think about it in terms of, that you're being ignored. I think that, just managing the sort of the volume and also the process does take quite a lot of thought and quite a lot of care. And there are obviously some sort of genuine sort of HR reasons for not proceeding in certain ways, or some sort of ethical standards that do need to be borne in mind. One thing that I did want to share with you, which is not often obvious, I think, if you're sort of coming at it from the applicant's part, is people who, this idea that candidates should be treated with parity as far as possible, right through. People are notified at the same time, are called for interview, are asked broadly the same things at the interview, are asked to present on broadly the same topic, because that is done out of a kind of sense of fairness, that everyone gets a similar shot. And I have been involved in situations where people are sort of, well, can I come for an interview at a different time? I can't make that, but then if you do that, then you might have lost one of the panel members because they're not available that time, and then therefore that affects the configuration of the panel, that affects the decision-making process. So if you're not able to make the interview time, and you're told tough, there's not necessarily a kind of meanness behind that. It's more a consideration of the process and respecting everybody's, I suppose, chance at so that just hopefully that kind of nuance is a little more visible there. Logistics, shortlisting. I've had some scarily short timeframes to turn around 100-odd CVs, to turn that into a shortlist of 6. And so all the more reason, which I'm going to come on and talk about CVs, the format of a CV in a moment, but all the more reason that your messages are quick to read and easily got across. And yeah, so I think I made the point about interviews and presentations already. Finally, and this session really is about paperwork, but I did think it was worth thinking just a little bit about, the interviews and the timings and what you're kind of allowed to ask, and what the expectations from the employer's side might be of what you can ask. So normally the head of department is a very useful person in the process. You would do get in touch with them if you have any questions. One thing that I think is really important is, do you have a list of your current modules that you're teaching, so that if you're asked in a presentation to talk about a particular module that you would like to teach, you're not teaching, offering something that's already on the books, or is, has a significant overlap with somebody else. That's the sort of information that is not terribly easy to find online. I mean, it'll vary according to the institutions, but that would be the sort of question, I think, which would be, highly relevant to ask a head of department, someone that has that slight insider knowledge that can help sort of shape your knowledge, or can help you with where to look for certain pieces of information. At the shortlisting stage, you won't get much feedback. There tends to be a sort of template of reasons why this person wasn't taken forward to interview. It will largely be around qualifications, or research area that was not necessarily what was being looked for. However, if you do get interviewed, there's a chance to really sort of engage with the panel, probably the head of the panel. If you didn't get the job, by that time they'll have got to know you a bit. They'll have have a sense of your sort of strengths and weaknesses right across the board. So I do think that's a really valuable sort of way of accessing information from the employer. Yeah, I realize I'm going wildly over time here, but if you have been offered the job, this is a very, very sort of late stage. If you haven't heard, it doesn't mean you haven't got the job. So do hang on until you've absolutely been told that you haven't got the job. There's all sorts of things that are happening sort of behind the scenes, and I can clarify that if you need me to. But then at the very end, the employer, once you've been offered the job, they'll be quite keen for you to sign on the dotted line. So it's as far as you possibly can to think through whether you actually want the job, bearing in mind that things may change according, that process. But have those conversations with loved ones, and try and sort of think yourself into it where possible, because it can come sort of quite quickly late on, even if you feel like it's been interminable as a process. Okay, sorry. Could we move on to the next bit? Actually, Sonny, should we pause for any questions there, or do you think we should go straight into the CV?
Let's just go straight into the CV because we're quite behind on time now.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay. Let's try and get through your bit, and then Stephanie, and we'll have questions in the second half of the presentation. I've told everyone, just to clarify, if anyone has any questions at this time, just feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll get to them in the next section. And we may run over a little bit on this side, but then we'll just kind of rearrange time for the second session. But yeah.
Right. So this is kind of a sort of generic CV, and really can and probably should be adapted depending on circumstances. But this is, I guess, what you would expect to find in a standard academic CV. And you're probably familiar with this. You've probably done a lot of this. But I think it's perhaps worth just seeing it written down. Name and contact info, hopefully fairly obvious. Your qualifications, do make it very clear if you are still in the process of writing up your PhD. Just be really clear about dates, because it's almost the first. Some jobs will actually advertise and say you have to have a PhD in hand, in which case you may get disqualified if you don't have the PhD in hand. That's just, it's one way of kind of dealing with potentially large numbers of applicants. However, just be honest and try and be as clear as possible about where you are in that process. Your employment history and current roles, number 3. I would say if you have a sort of fascinating backstory of a different career in a different, that's probably not the place to put all your kind of previous. So your employment history, insofar as it relates to the academic job that you're applying for, and then maybe find somewhere else on the CV later on, you know, or in the cover letter, perhaps to expand on, you know, your prior experience and how that kind of helps you into the academic world. So yeah, with an emphasis, so employment history and current roles with an emphasis on sort of prior training. Research, I've got a subsequent slide about publications which goes into a little bit more detail about the order of publications, but that would be the first sort of thing to put in your research section. List your grants if you've been fortunate to have obtained a grant or an award, or you've got funding for your PhD or whatever it is. Curation, I've put curation and practice in brackets, because I know that for some people your CVs, you know, you've done tons of this stuff, and that I think in an art history context is massively relevant. But I do think it depends very much on individual circumstances, how that, making that link, how that connects with the research that you're doing. So there's a little bit of kind of, I guess, way of working around your individual kind of contribution there. Conference papers, some people write, you know, have given an awful lot of conference papers. I would say of all the bits on the CV that get skimmed through the quickest, that's probably it. You know, when you're starting out, it's really great if you can put your different appearances, but not necessarily everything when you get a little bit more experienced. And then the sort of public-facing work, if you happen to have experience there, I think, again, if it relates to your research and reaching wider audiences, that's really relevant. Moving on to teaching, list of modules taught. So what, you know, what is your experience? Just be as kind of clear about what you've actually done as possible. Also, any kind of leadership that you've done. You might think, oh gosh, I'm too early to have done any lead, but you'd be surprised how much you may well have taken the initiative in certain areas, and I think that kind of information is, you know, are you a kind of someone that likes taking responsibility? Have you had to sort of work with a team, and did you have to sort of take the initiative in certain ways? So all that is valuable. Finally, I'm trying to move quickish through this. Administration, it doesn't have to be called administration. You can call it leadership. You can call it service. That's more of an American term, but something to do with how you contribute to the running of things, and also where can you make where have you actively tried to make your institution, your current institution, better. I think anything that you've done there in the widest possible sense is valuable there. Other community or discipline activity, don't forget that. And then finally, your referee's contact details. So that would be what I would expect to see in an academic CV. Can we move on, please, to the next slide? Okay, with a slight caveat, and we are going to come on to talk about cover letters very soon, but thinking about how you could tweak your CV to the job that you're applying for. And I say this as somebody who has sat in on a lot of teaching only interview panels, where people try to present themselves as star researchers, and I think that, and it's really hard to say, because you know, a lot of you are studying for your PhDs, you're hugely invested in that work, you've been encouraged to think of yourself as a researcher, and then suddenly you're confronted with a different set of parameters when you're being asked to, you know, and if the contract is a teaching only contract, yes, your research is important, who you are, what you can, but can you teach is the #1 consideration. So I do think it's worth thinking about, you know, how to structure, and I think this is about volume, relative volume, rather than necessarily tweaking the order of things. I think it's fine for research to come in at the start and then but you know, make it look like you're a keen teacher and a capable teacher. So that would be what I would say there. And then I think I did have one more slide publications. We did actually, I think, receive a question, a pre session question about what's the best way to order your publications, and I do appreciate that some people are at the very start of this journey and feel like they maybe don't have that much to show, but you know, you'll get, before you know it, you'll sort of, well, how do I order this? It actually gets harder the more you have to give a coherent structure to it, believe me. I would recommend an order of going from long to short, first of all, and secondly, from the more academic to the less academic. So more of a kind of tendency in your ordering than a kind of absolute categorization. So start with any monographs, any book form materials that you have. Secondly, any kind of articles or book chapters. Moving on then to short form. And again, I think book and exhibition reviews, when you're starting out, I think it's really good to show that you've done that kind of work. Although, you know, moving on, I think you might not necessarily at a sort of later point in your career be listing all your book and exhibition reviews, but I do think it's good at an early stage. And then finally, any sort of writing that's either kind of crossover, non-academic, or entirely, you know, for a general audience. I think it's definitely, you know, can you write? I do think that's valuable information. Reverse chronology, I think, works well from newest to oldest. And then really important, going back to what I said about incredibly short turnaround time sometimes for reading a lot of CVs when you are on a job panel. Be really honest and really clear about where this publication is. You know, is it real? You know, one assumes a basic level of trust, but there are different ways that you can make it clear that it is concrete. You know, page numbers if it's in print, you know, links and so on. You know, I think those are kind of quick mental checks that anyone reading your CV you know, quite quickly will think, oh yes, okay, this looks real, this looks coherent. And, you know, obviously if you get shortlisted, then there'd be further sort of background checks on all of that. But what you want to be able to see at a glance is, you know, oh, this looks like a really credible publication because it's got X, Y, and Z. So what's the little checklist that you can do? And if it's, you know, I wouldn't not necessarily say put down works in preparation. I think maybe if you're in a sort of advanced stage of preparation in an early career situation, that's great. But I would steer clear unless you've got very sort of concrete evidence of that in preparation. But in press, accepted absolutely needs to go in. But give us some timings. Okay, I'm going to shut up. Sorry for going on so much.
Cool. And Stephanie, if you want to take it away now. Thank you, Melissa.
Okay, great, thanks. I have some slides as well. What I prepared is sort of designed to take about 7 minutes to get through, and I'll try to be sort of quick-ish, and I will also try to take over screen share. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that now. So what I'm going to do, sorry, I'll just actually do this as full screen. What I'm going to do is go through a sort of formula that you can use as a template, but as with everything, this is designed to be a starting point, not something that you absolutely have to conform to. So I'll talk about a research and teaching role, a teaching role, and a museum job. And this is sort of the order in which information is most often presented. You normally open with a brief paragraph introducing yourself, name the job that you're applying for, name your current position. If you're a fellowship, If you're a fellow, name it. If you're still a PhD student, put in the expected date of completion. Doesn't need to be like an actual calendar date, but like a month and a year or a year. 1 to 2 brief sentence of your research specialism, which is pretty broad. And here I would say, I specialize in, or I'm a historian of, instead of saying I studied. Position yourself as the expert, not a student. 1 sentence or so on your education history, and you could have a brief closing, sentence. So that's usually your opening paragraph. Your second paragraph talks about your major research project. For an academic job, this is usually a book. That's the standard. Now, most of you will not have written a book while you're applying for a job. That's fine. What you're talking about is your plans to turn your PhD research into a book. Even if you're still a student, you need to show sort of an understanding that that's where the research is going to go. Here's where you can give a more specific formulation of your research specialism. So in your headline, in your opening paragraph, I would say, I'm a historian of 18th and 19th century art, focusing on the relationship between art and science. In my second paragraph, I would say, my PhD focused on these artists and these years, and I explored it in these ways. You can go into a more detailed formulation. You connect it to specific publications, both existing ones and ones that you plan. You should foreground the book, and that could include, you want to show that the book is underway or that you're planning for it to be underway. This could include when you intend to, have completed a manuscript and or a scholarly press you intend to submit it to. And if you don't have a publication, you would say, I'm in the process of turning this into an article, which I will submit to X journal in Y time period, like summer 2024. And you want to be sort of confident about how you're projecting that. The next section, or usually a paragraph, would be what comes next. And honestly, this is going to sound insane, but it's your second book. I was a PhD student applying to jobs saying, and in my second book, I hadn't even written my first book. Most people don't know what their second book is going to be about. That's okay. You are showing direction of travel of your research. And this is coming back to what Melissa said about potential. You're showing the next thing I'm going to do, I'm going to build on my dissertation research. I'm going to expand that. And you also want to show that you understand that the expectation for a research and teaching job is that you will write another book, that the book is the ultimate form of publication in our field. So you're showing ambition. You're showing that you intend to remain research active. And here, it's okay, you're going to have to fudge it a bit on the topic. What do you think is the most likely topic that sounds exciting and relevant to the field that would be a likely next step for your research? And ideally, again, link it to anything concrete. For this, it will likely be like a conference paper that you've given. This would also be a great place to mention future grant applications that you would intend to make while on the job in support of the project. So, I will apply for an AHRC Future Leaders Grant to support a series of workshops on this topic. You want to project, you be hopeful, be confident, say that you're going to apply for grants because that is something that looks really good and is an important part of the job. And you may mention here any local or regional resources that you would use as you're developing this topic. Next paragraph is usually teaching experience, past teaching experience, any teaching-based qualifications. You could discuss a few key teaching values such as, I prioritize discussion-based learning. If you're just running tutorials, like there are ways to make this sound, you can sort of pull out from there. I work in group formats and we discuss readings and also images. Visual analysis is very key to how I run my classroom. You're sort of mentioning that you're showing that you can teach and show an understanding of the kind of teaching that this institution does. So it wouldn't look great if you say, I'd love to offer this kind of course when their program isn't structured to allow that kind of course. So you might say, I'd look forward to offering modules on topics such as X. Below that, you might have a section in which you discuss any major work outside of teaching and research, which could be, yeah, I've said collaborations, work with museums, editorial work, etc. There's a place for you to bring out other strengths that are sort of unique to you. Oh, I forgot to mention with the teaching paragraph, it looks great if you can mention, again, regional resources, a museum, a university collection that you could teach with. That shows you've done your homework. You've looked at this institution, you've thought about what it would be like to research and teach there. Oh, there's a nearby museum in X, and they've got a great 19th century collection. I would do object-based learning, and we would have a class trip to the museum. That sort of stuff looks top class on a cover letter. And then, finally, just a brief closing. I recommend that you say, be confident. Say, included in my application, you will find my curriculum vitae and writing sample. Thank you for my consideration. I look forward to hearing from you. That's how I like to end mine, is confident. I have, so then I'm not going to go through this in the same degree of detail. It's the same as a research role, except you flip the order. Teaching experience comes first. And here you need to be specific to the teaching needs that are stated in the ad. You need to show that you can teach specific classes that they've listed or offer classes in the specific area they say that they need covered. And you're linking it to concrete past experience you have. And, there are ways to sort of frame things like teaching tutorials as looking, quite significant. Use institutional letterhead if you can. As a PhD student, you should be able to do this. Ask your sort of departmental administrator. In all of these, you want to show you've done your homework. You want to show that you fit the parameters of the job description, and try to be pretty clear with this. Be concrete, link to things that you have done, conference papers, publications, a workshop you attended, a reading group you were part of, whatever it is. You want to show that you understand what the job requires. And especially coming back to what Melissa said, for teaching only roles, we need someone who can just come in and teach day one. So you just want to sort of give that impression, I'm ready to teach, and I have the expertise that will enable me to do this. And, again, I suggest don't say I hope to, or I would want to, or I would like to. Imagine yourself in the job. I would, or I will. My book project based on my PhD research will show X. If it's an academic job, don't replicate too much of the exact wording from the job advertisement. I just put a little note that there's a difference in length for UK versus US jobs. We can talk more about those differences in the follow-up session if there's interest. And then finally, for museum roles, slightly different format and also usually a bit more compressed, a bit shorter. Same kind of introduction. I forgot to research. I'll come back to this. We can talk about this if we want, but you'll want to clearly express when you talk about your research how it contributes to the field. Okay, museums. Here you prioritize significant and relevant professional experience, which can be broadly conceived. It could be museum experience, but also other activities that show you have relevant practical skills. So in the opening paragraph, again, the role you're applying for, your status, your position, a broader expression of your research. So I would say, I'm a historian of 18th and 19th century European art, period. Broad, frame it broadly. And then in your significant experience, think about specifics, again, that would link to the broader skills of the job, again, showing that you can hit the ground running and showing that you can work collaboratively. After that, you would have a more compressed description of your most impressive or relevant past academic experience. Here you would want to focus on links between academic experience and the specifics of this museum role. Be thinking across them. And if possible, you would want to highlight links between your academic experience and the museum's collection. And And then again, a sort of a summative closing. In this case, you know, you're really making a specific pitch about how you are right for this role. So it's important, once again, to do your research, know what recent exhibitions they have held. Is there a tie-in with your research? Mention it. Do they know what kind of collection they have? Is there a particular bequest or a particular collection strength? Show that you know that and that you can work with it. Do they have a specific kind of programming? You know, be aware of this. Yeah, and especially with museums, you want to show that you can work collaboratively and that you know how to speak to a non-academic audience. So you want to avoid that kind of jargon, which is much more acceptable in a teaching and research cover letter. And again, think broadly and think dynamically. And this is the final point I'll close on. If you don't have past museum experience, you want to think creatively and strategically, as Jack was saying, about your past experience. So have you been on projects that address a non-academic audience? Have you worked with objects in collections? Have you brought a group project to fruition? Have you planned a conference? Have you organized a reading group? If so, you have skills that can qualify you to be good in a museum job. So try to think creatively about that and expansively and confidently. Okay, I'll leave it at that.
That was great.
Just quickly before we go into the break, I just want to say one thing, which is that we've given you loads of specifics here, and I'm sure Melissa and Steph will be really happy to share those PowerPoints so you have some of those details, or at least a sort of summary of them. But just step back for a second and connect it to what we were saying right at the beginning, right? These documents work, we've separated them out, but they work together, and they essentially work together to do just three things, right? A narrative of who you are, a narrative of how you fit, and information that makes this substantial rather than fiction, right? Those are the key. So we've given you loads of specifics to do it, but just as we go into a little break, just want everyone to be thinking really that these two things work in consort to really give these narratives of who you are, how you fit, and the substance of that. I think it's just important to put those things into dialogue before we take a break.
That's great. Thank you. Yeah, and I'll bring that up and then when we come back. But we talked a lot about this idea of strategic storytelling with grant and bursary applications yesterday, which I think kind of aligns with this idea of narrative as well. But we'll come back to that. So let's just take maybe like a 2-minute break. If anyone needs to use the restroom or make a cup of tea, coffee, go ahead and do that. And then we'll come back for Q&A and the workshop session. Cool.
Jack, are you and I the only ones with our video still on?
Hi.
Okay, well, I guess I'm going to put my video off too if everyone else is
No,
doing
I'm going to keep mine on out of stubbornness.
Good. Well, we've got a good question in the chat, which I think you can speak to. And anyone who's sort of still here and not officially taking their break, just we want this to be open and informal. If it's a question you have, it's probably a question your peers have, so don't be shy.
Okay. Do you think that's enough time for a break? Never great at gauging.
Yeah, I think we're all gathered here. Let's get some questions coming in.
Go ahead and start. Yeah, perfect. So yeah, I think starting with Q&A would be good. I know I've got quite a lot of questions, but there are also a few questions in the box as well, or the chat box. So I guess I'll go ahead and start with those because they're starting to roll in now. So one of the first questions asks if you could give some suggestions for applying for a PhD. So it seems like we have a someone who's looking to pursue a more higher education. So what should a PhD application cover letter be like? Do any of you have any guidance on that?
I actually don't, because I can't think of a cover letter as being a substantive part of a PhD application, at least in the UK or in the US. Instead, personally, I would think of the first stage, as many people in this room will already know, of these kind of discussions are to start a conversation informally with a potential supervisor who you want to have helping you kind of shape your application and supporting the application as it moves through either stages for funding or indeed through an institution. And so those conversations always or normally happen by email. And so it's not going to be a formal cover letter, but it's going to be a nice, simple email suggesting your interests and suggesting a kind of probably either face-to-face or online conversation or phone conversation that gets you going. So you don't want to be you might want to include your CV in that, and that all of the things that Melissa has kind of outlined already in terms of CV and the substance of your qualifications are important to share, but I wouldn't be framing things in such a formal way.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think the key document in that application process is the PhD proposal, which is all about what the research is going to be, and that's something that you would want to work, get the advice of the potential supervisor. So yeah, it's a process, definitely. Exeter has some good advice, generic advice on how to put a PhD proposal together, which I won't be able to find right now, but I probably could. Or you can Google it for yourself.
That's great. Stephanie, did you have anything you want to add to that? Or are you quite happy? Cool. Yeah, I don't recall having to submit a cover letter for my PhD at Edinburgh either. So a second question, this is an interesting and quite good question. So someone who is older and beginning a new career in art history, would you address the age issue in your cover letter? If so, how?
I would not think of it as an age issue, but I think that it would be understandable and sort of normal to say, that you return to art history after a career break. I would just call it a career break. You don't need to go into details about what you did during that period. You don't owe anyone that explanation, and people won't care too much about it as long as you show sort of current activity. You want to have the sense that since the career break, you are active in the field now.
Great.
Also, it depends what you're doing, but as Steph was saying, that it's likely that whatever you were doing, there is perhaps a significant amount of experience relevant to the work that you can bring forward. So if you were working, say, in publishing, and you were applying for a museum job, there are all sorts of creative and practical skills that you will then be pulling in. So definitely not an issue, as Steph says.
Yeah, I think thinking of holistically about what an academic career job actually is, it's a whole range of different skills, and those skills come out in different ways and at different times. So yeah, if there's some way to think about the transferability, then yeah, absolutely bring in your prior experience.
Great, thank you. Another question that I missed in my swath of questions, any suggestions for a hybrid CV format that would be suitable for academic and curating / glam roles, or is it best to keep the two as separate documents?
I would jump in and say no, for the reasons that we mentioned earlier. And as Steph sort of outlined, and Melissa outlined, there are lots of aspects here that cross over, but I actually wouldn't have I've never sent the same CV or cover letter to two jobs, really ever. These are things that need to be specifically tailored. So if you do have that everything CV or that everything cover letter where you've got lots of paragraphs, then you're in each case, regardless of whether it's glam, whether it's curatorial, whether it's academic, whether it's beyond that, you're then synthesizing specifically for that job. anyone who's on, to take Melissa's point, who's on the receiving end of these things can instantly tell a generic cover letter which doesn't make mention of the institution. There's a little bit of institutional flattery normally that you want to maybe try and get in there. And certainly the points about teaching relevance, about curating relevance, about local collections, all these things are so specific that although a lot of your phrasing can be similar, I wouldn't want it to be the same. And so I think just the roles are different. And so the CVs and materials should be different.
Great. Anyone else have any thoughts? Melissa, Stephanie, maybe?
I mean, just in a practical sense, to affirm what Jack says, I have a master document, and every time I've ever applied for anything, I open up a new version of the master document and I decide what bits I cut out because they're not relevant and if I need to move anything around. So it's not, when he says a different CV for every job application, that's not such an onerous task if you keep a sort of master document.
Thank you. That's great advice. I think that's such a helpful thing to hear. I've highlighted that in my document of my notes. So thank you. Someone else asked, what are your thoughts on using a generative AI to help structure your cover letter? What are your thoughts?
I would advise against it. Because what AI is drawing upon, AI doesn't have access to successful cover letters that resulted in offers for academic jobs. Those are not uploaded on the internet. So AI does not have a good pool of underlying information to draw upon. Instead, it's going to draw upon a bunch of other stuff, and you might end up, so it could end up quite awkward. And honestly, I think if you're really stuck for how to structure it, I would just open up the PowerPoint I've said and say each one of these sections is a paragraph and just try to populate it.
Or indeed use your own, rather than a kind of, math model, language model, use your own network, speak to colleagues who actually have specific advice, speak to peers who have engaged with these kinds of things. The only thing where maybe online materials might be useful, one of the things you do have to master in a cover letter is sort of saying the same thing, but in a few different ways, There's only so many times you can be really eager. I'm really eager to bring to the department my experience in X, right? And you don't sort of want every paragraph to say that, but that's a writerly thing. And if you have tools that are beyond, that are superhuman that help you with that, great. But exactly as Steph says, you have access to people who have been successful in your networks rather than in kind of digital tools.
A perfectly good place to start is, do you have a friend or someone you're friendly enough with who has gotten an academic job? Email them and say, hey, I know this is, it's okay if you say no, but would you be willing to share with me your cover letter? And people almost always say yes. That's how I figured out how to write cover letters. I got a few friends who were a little bit further along, and I looked at what they did and I tried to kind of replicate it. And over time, I found a way to make it my own.
That's great advice as well. Yeah, drawing on your network, I think, is such an important aspect of kind of pushing forward into your career. Because I think especially at the end of the PhD, you probably have met so many people and that have that experience. And again, just to plug the DECR as well and the events that we do, it's a great place to meet people that you can connect with through different events like the Summer Symposium or the AH conference, where you can meet people who are a bit further in their stages of the career, to network and meet people as well. So another question that we have is, how do you get past the chicken and the egg problem when you don't have past experience teaching the core subject, but you're interested to expand in that area and you feel like you could do it? So their comment says, we taught, sorry, it's now moved because someone's popped another one in. We taught our first courses, if we're lucky enough to get teaching experience, such a huge learning curve. So sometimes in that area, we didn't know that well at all.
One thing I'll just say quickly and then let my colleagues jump in is, you can play that as a strength. So you can say, I have experience teaching in a range of topics, including areas outside of my specific research expertise. That looks good. That shows that you're adaptable as a colleague and as a teacher. know what Melissa and Jack think.
I agree with that, and I also think that the tendency to towards interdisciplinary teaching modules. I know at Exeter we have a sort of policy of trying to attract students from other disciplines in order to sort of populate our modules, and there's a sort of, if you like, a bit of a market going on. So I think just don't get too hung up on if you haven't got that sort of very niche teaching in your specialist area, or even the sort of, you know, the run-of-the-mill kind of art history. You know, first, I would say, you know, any kind of teaching experience whatsoever is valuable. Even tutoring, you know, and if you worked with sixth formers, or, you know, put that down, because that shows a curiosity, and it shows you know, that you have tried and sought different ways to strengthen your CV. So keep pushing at it, and eventually, you know, you'll probably get more teaching than you ever wanted. So.
The only thing I would add is to the specific point that you asked about when you don't have experience in the specific subject of a course. I mean, you can absolutely flip all of the points that colleagues have already made about making, you know, say that I could do this again. I could easily move into, and I have the capacity to teach outside of my field, and in your specific field, but it might be something a bit more granular. So if they're really looking for someone to teach German Expressionism, and you haven't ever taught German Expressionism, but you did teach a theory module, right? You could make an explicit case, say, you know, I teach this module, and including this theory module in which we discussed matters of German, you know, expressionist kind of artwork. There's a way in which, you don't want to lie, but there's a way in which there's a flexibility to some kinds of teaching, which, or maybe you've included particularly, it's actually probably more often the other way around. They might want someone to teach a theory module, or you've taught maybe explicitly on paper is a course on the history of Venetian painting. But you could say, you know, my approach to teaching Venetian painting has been very theoretical and includes discussions of this theorist, which is going to be highly relevant to when I develop this brand new course for you in this. So, you know, that's probably getting a little too granular, but if the job description itself is really hyper specific and you feel completely like there's nothing on your CV, remember this is where your CV could be a nice place to expand some of the points you make in your cover letter. But if you feel completely unequipped in those areas, it's about, again, creatively kind of signaling past successes, past adaptability, and some concrete examples as well.
Great, thank you. And we've got a hand raised from Anne Griselli. Do you want to come on, ask your question?
Hi. Yes, thank you so much for sharing such a wealth of information. I'm wondering if you would mind expanding upon the general expectation for the length of cover letters and CVs. So is there a difference in expectation, for example, between US and UK institutions?
My sense is that sorry, I'm just jumping right in here, but other colleagues have, you know, I think we've all taught and worked in the US in different capacities as well, so we can speak to that specifically. But this is never something I've ever seen concretely specified. So that's one thing that's really important to say. If it creeps onto an extra page, I guess no, it's not a disaster. But the logic, just to explain the logic, is the volume of things that people are getting in. One of the things that's often, you know, I should say that both the UK and the US, there are often situations in which there's material beyond a CV and a cover letter that you're required to submit. That might include, in the US, for example, a statement on research, a statement on of research philosophy, a statement on teaching philosophy, a diversity and inclusion statement, right? In the UK, it's often maybe an online box where you might have to speak to some specific points of the job description in a larger format. So these can be quite capacious things. So in a sense, your cover letter is a great way of just really shrinking down. If there are all these extra things, you might even only want a cover letter that is only a single jazzy, punchy page. So you've got to roll a bit with what the specific, otherwise you're going to be repeating yourself loads, and that's not ideal. The 2-page thing, I think, is because that's sort of generally a sense that people have, that's a nice substantive amount where you can get good amounts of information across, but it's literally can be double-sided on a single piece of paper, and it doesn't overwhelm the people who are reviewing these things. I think in the States, maybe there's a sense you can be a little bit longer, maybe 3 pages, but to be honest with you, all of my US applications, including a postdoc where I was successful, was only two pages. So a slightly piece of string thing, but again, the main thing here is content, clarity, precision, excitement. You don't want to send to a big long list of stuff.
Mm.
But maybe Steph and Melissa think
Yeah,
differently.
no,
or have
I
not
think
said
we broadly covered it there. I think there's a tendency to be more wordy in a US setup and for more expectations. The other thing I would not advise including is teaching evaluations. I have had pages and pages. Someone really wanted to share their evaluate, but you know that's just you know, you might want to include a quotation or a snippet of something that has, you know, is very, but you don't need numbers and you don't need the sort of raw data, if you like.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thank you both.
Thanks. So we had a question that was asking about how you should address cover letter too, but you know, and how should you sign off? And Stephanie has kindly popped it into the chat. So maybe dear selection committee, dear search committee for US jobs, or dear and then name of head of search, which is normally specified in the advert. So I know in previous jobs that I've had, that I've kind of applied for, I've done a Google search of maybe who the hiring manager would be, or Dear Selection Committee is another one that I've used, which I think is quite useful. And sometimes the advert will list who you're directly speaking to. The second question is, some job applications ask for a personal statement instead of a cover letter. Could you speak a little bit about the differences in approaching these two documents?
I mean, this is tricky, and actually in a recent example I can speak to, and this is maybe something that I realized I had the confidence to do later on in my career, but it just said a personal statement. It didn't say a cover letter. I didn't know what that meant, because what is a personal statement in relation to this was an academic job? And so there will almost always, I think it was somewhere in someone's slide, be a point of contact for jobs that you can get in touch with and ask. Sometimes it's an HR person, in which case I would feel very free to contact them because they aren't people who are necessarily making part of the hiring decision. It might, in some cases, it's a responsible kind of, but an individual who's explicitly stated as not being part of the hiring committee, in which case, again, contact them and just ask the question. Hi, I'm interested in this job. You've asked for this, but could you give a little bit more information? They will have that material to give you, because they will probably answer that. Or if it's not clear, that's on them and they need to clarify. If the point of contact is the head of the committee, just make sure those conversations proceed in an awareness that this is someone who will be part of the panel that evaluates you. So all bells and whistles in terms of formal polite emailing, I would suggest. One thing I would say, and I'm recently speaking with a colleague who's a head of department about this, is don't feel the need to contact these people unless you have a concrete question. I think there's a sense out there that it's a good thing to do to get your name on the map, to kind of make sure that you're in the mind of someone. And I kind of see the logic there. But if everyone did that, then this poor head of department is speaking to 100 people. And those conversations are pretty clear when someone has a concrete question or not. In this case, you have a concrete question, which you're perfectly legitimately able to ask. If you can't find the answer in your network and it seems job specific, write to the point of contact politely, clearly, and ask for some clarification.
Thank you. And there was a question as well that was asking for any advice on how to make online publications seem more substantial and legitimate in a CV. For example, a digital catalog raisonné.
If it's got a DOI, you can include that. I mean, digital catalog raisonné, that sounds great. And I think, for instance, in a cover letter, you could, flag that and say, I'm keen to disseminate my research on open access platforms, which is a big mandate that we're facing now, for example, through my digital publications, including this digital exhibition catalog, which makes this information, widely available to a broader public. Like, you can play that as a strength. But I think you also treat it like, it's a publication, treat it like one. I think, I don't know, if Jack and Melissa would agree, but I think that looks.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I think those old binaries are breaking down very fast. So
Yeah, and also inherent in the question is a slight sense that maybe you have a little bit of a worry that that this is somehow not good. You sort of make it seem more substantial. It sounds like it's really substantial. And I think that is a completely, where we all are often at the beginning of our careers. But remember, the people in this room, not the three of us, you are the future of this discipline. And so what you decide is important will become the important things in the discipline. Now, obviously, you need to be cautious and kind of show a degree of humility, but that is where the excitement comes in. The work that you are doing now, I really want you all to come away here feeling empowered that the work you are doing now can and indeed must be framed as the future of what we are all doing here. And so exactly as both Melissa and Steph have said, this is the future. And some of the things that you might be doing, the structures of hiring might not quite have caught up, in which case you might want to temper something of it, right? If you're doing exclusive work in, I don't know, kind of musical performance, art history, that's completely, or something that's completely out there, right? You might want to make sure that you're really speaking to the job description and the details. But if you are doing something innovative and cool, like open access online, that's a big part of it, front and center, positive thing, totally, an asset, not a weakness.
Thank you. Such an optimistic and like encouraging thing to say, just to.
But it's true. It's true. And actually, this is what's always lost in the process of people with more experience giving advice to people with less experience, is that I don't have my finger on the pulse in a way that actually, and also disciplinarily. Everyone in this room who's working at a PhD will know way more about the specifics and maybe the kind of motions and the movement of their field than someone like me who hasn't been to an international conference in a few years, who's publishing on my quite neat, esoteric thing. You are well equipped.
Thank you. Another question we have is, any thoughts or pointers on the actual design and layout of a CV? Is it a simple list type Word document, or kind of a more design kind of aesthetic vibe a bit better? This is also a question I had as well.
I guess I would err towards being fairly conservative on the layout. I think a fairly standard font. Don't do tricks and flashy. I think make it neat, clear, legible, sequential.
Right.
I agree. So you can think about, you want it to be easily skimmable. So Melissa's point about having publications in order from newest to oldest, think about structuring the page so that the date, the year of publication runs the same along the left-hand margin. And then the info about publication sort of starts at the same space for each one, so that you can sort of see like, okay, 2004, 2003, and can sort of skim down. You can do that for fellowships as well. So you do want it to be kind of digestible, but for now, the convention is that flashy things, designy things, it's not the done thing, but I think that could change. And I also want to mention, I just realized in typing a response to Anisha that I say in my PowerPoint don't embed images, but there's the critical exception to this, which is an embedded photo of your signature. Is nice to have in your sign-off, if you like, but is not essential and will not make a difference to how seriously your materials will be taken.
Just to quickly add to that idea of skimming clarity. I mean, recently I sent off a cover letter where actually I had in bold the word, the word and a colon, that was the point of that paragraph, right? So rather than maybe assuming that everyone knows the same kind of structure, at least what you want is the first sentence of that cover letter. So I know the question was about CV, but briefly on cover letters, to make clear, mention teaching in the first few words of the teaching paragraph, for instance. But sometimes, and I took this from a colleague as well who was doing the same thing in American studies, teaching : and then just start the much more narrative kind of thing. I think that clarity is actually, it feels like you're slightly cheapening yourself by giving these pointers, but you're actually, I think, giving yourself a better sense of getting very quickly through to the person who's reading it. And quickly on the process of and the kind of outline of CVs, one thing we said we would mention, the AHRC has started, so those of you who maybe applying for fellowships through them have started to require what they call narrative CVs. All I'm going to do, because I'm not an expert in this, is I'm dropping it into a link into the chat there, which is this is a phrase they use now, R4RI, which is Resume for Research and Innovation, and it's essentially the Royal Historical Society has done some work on this. It might be, I would always Word document, nice and simple, bullet points, kind of itemized, dating, very clear, exactly what colleagues have said. But there's a possibility that for reasons of diversity inclusion, but also for specific different kinds of applications of fellowships, things you might do, we might start to see more of this kind of CV apply for. And it's essentially basically narrativizing your CV. So still keeping things nice and short and crisp, but in a sense, just having a little more information, a little more substance, almost like a CV hybrid, maybe. So those two things can kind of come together. But that's a very unusual and quite new quirk, but we might see more of that. So just be alert to that possibility in terms of structure.
That's really interesting. Thank you. It kind of makes me think, I've seen a lot of job advertisements, not necessarily in academia, but that have alternative ways of writing your cover letter. So for example, providing like a video detailing your experience, which I think also I think speaks to more terms of like accessibility. I'd be interested to see if we would ever see that in an academic setting in a way of kind of conveying information as opposed to specifically writing. But narrativity, I think, is a step personally in that direction. So had one other question. So do you have any advice for altering your academic CV for an alt academia job, one that might have some overlaps with your past work, but ultimately have different focuses than research teaching jobs will?
I think there's probably a whole session that should for alt-ac. But I'll mention the professional experience will go at the top right below your education. And when you're thinking about what you put in there, it is true that you will need to think differently and think strategically. So there could be things that you did that you would normally classify as academic experience, but that showed skills like working collaboratively, managing a project, managing different kinds of information, liaising between different kinds of institutions, and then you would frame it that way. So let's say you had a role on, your little research cluster, you might say institutional liaison between X and Y, period, and then the description of the role that you had. Also in real alt-ac, including non-museum CVs, sometimes it is, those little bullet points can be slightly more narrative too. So, I don't know, I proofread my sister's like accounting CV, and she'll say like the title and then like a extremely brief description of like the specific responsibilities that came with that role. So that's a place you can say like, oh, I did this thing. I worked in the student union. Core responsibilities included, managing the schedule, coordinating between different constituencies. You could have like a brief little compressed cluster of what those core activities were, which would show skills that transfer to non-academic jobs, even if you had that work experience within an academic context.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, Sunny, you go ahead.
I was going to say I have experience because I worked in quite a few administrative and personal assistant office management roles before and whilst doing my PhD and loads of like retail and etc. So yeah, I think that bullet point of kind of listing the job and then bullet points of kind of practical transferable skills is really useful. And then obviously you can do the reverse if you take academic position or kind of a research position and then put that onto kind of more alternative academia jobs as well. And yeah, I had a recruiter work with me on that years ago when I left my undergraduate my university that I went to do that, and that was kind of best practice, was the kind of bullet points that, you know, there's these buzzwords like corresponded with or liaised with or coordinated, organized, and then just a quick blurb of what you've done. I don't know if that's useful to think about.
I think another view from academia, if you like, is you know, we know that so many people are in this position that you know, are taking OLTAC jobs, are taking, you know, things that the sort of the imagined, you know, easy transition from PhD into, you know, open-ended, you know, it just doesn't happen. And so think of what you have as a strength and not as a weakness, and yes, can you speak the different, you know, do you have that ability to translate across different job sectors, and what can you bring? You know, you bring knowledge from elsewhere to what you're applying for.
Absolutely. Thank you. So we've got just a couple more minutes. So it seems like time has ran away from us in terms of giving an example of what a cover letter would look like. But I think the Q&A session has been really, really useful, and almost getting a kind of more overall concept of what a cover letter and a CV would look like. And also, I don't know, I'm assuming everyone else has found this, but I've found it really, really useful as someone who's just submitted my PhD and am in the process of, you know, looking for jobs and looking towards the next step, and having to, you know, like I was saying earlier, I have that professional CV, but I don't have an academic CV drawn up yet. And I have a kind of a conglomeration of all the things I've done and didn't know where to start. And I found this was so useful. And again, this word demystifying has kind of shown up in every single panel that we've had over the last 2 days. And I think in terms of knowing how to write an academic CV and cover letter for art history, I feel really confident that I can go and do these things now after hearing from all three of you. And it's been just so incredibly useful. And yeah, just really, really appreciative of all three of you. And great to have this collaboration as well with the HEC committee and the DECR, because it's something that we've talked about for a while. And I definitely hope that this can kind of generate more, I guess, sessions to come out of this, and work a bit more closely with you guys on kind of DECR development, for sure. Does anyone have any final questions for Stephanie, Melissa, and Jack before we wrap up for today?
I guess I'm just wondering, we've got this captive audience about, you know, thinking about future sessions, you know, is there anything that you felt like we didn't quite cover today, but could possibly turn into a future session? People
That's
could
a great question.
just like bung it in the chat right now before we all forget.
Yeah, that's a great question, actually. So I was thinking of perhaps doing a survey, but maybe it's better to, while we've got people here, and we could probably do a survey after this. I think it'd be useful to see, you know, what were these last four these 4 panels over the 2 days useful, but also what would you want to see the DECR and maybe the HEC do, and what kind of advice, you know, are people seeking? So if anyone has anything, please feel free to pop it in the chat. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, great.
This is great.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
I also wanted to, sorry, Sunny, I just wanted to mention, coming back to sort of demystifying and barriers, one of the pieces of advice I gave was ask someone who's a bit further along for a cover letter of something successful that they applied for. I understand that that does presume that, you know, you like are networked with people who have gotten these jobs, and that may not be true for plenty of people. You now know me. If you were in this session and you want to see a cover letter that I used to apply for a job, you can email me. I don't want to speak for my fellow panelists, but, you know,
likewise,
I find it
please,
slightly
please
cringeworthy, but I'm happy to, you know, yeah.
I would, but I think my stuff is a little past its sell-by. That I was quite surprised at things like, you know, date of birth and stuff, and you know, that now I just wouldn't consider putting down. And yeah, when I looked back, things have changed.
That's great. Thank you. Jack and Stephanie, do you mind if when we send, because I think we'll probably send a follow-up email to all the attendees over the last 4 sessions, or even, I don't, yeah, I
Got
guess.
my email address, email address.
Is that okay?
Fine,
Yeah, your
Of course,
contact.
people are very welcome to,
Okay, fantastic.
But remember, you do also, I would also just say to the very first point about networks, you know, you might not even seem like you have networks, but you all have had lecturers, supervisors to get to this stage, you know, and they are just like, you know, Melissa and Steph and I in similar positions, different stages of careers, but they will all have, you know, if not materials to share, they will all definitely have advice to give. So, but count me among them as well.
Thank you. And yeah, just further on that, you do have, you know, the DECR committee as well. We're always happy to receive emails, and we have quite a few other, just to wrap up, a couple of opportunities to network as a you know, as the kind of wider DECR network. So for example, we have a reading group that is going on this summer. I think it'll be ending, I want to say in June or July. So definitely have a look at our website or our Twitter account to keep up on that. And then also, we've just extended the deadline for our call for papers for the summer symposium, which will be in person in Liverpool at Liverpool John Moores. So yeah, keep an eye out if you're interested in applying for that conference, please do, and come and attend if you can. It'll be, yeah, a really great opportunity to meet and network with fellow DECRs. Last year's summer symposium was super successful. It was in Glasgow, and some of our new DECR members are actually people who spoke at that conference, but also, you know, you do kind of make new friendships and expand your network in attending events like that. So yeah. But I just want to say thank you so much to Stephanie, Melissa, and Jack once again. And thank you to everybody who's attended, whether this is your first session of the day or of, you know, of the 2 days, or if you've attended all of them or any of them at all. It's just fantastic to see so many people online. So yeah, thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Sunny, for organising so well.
Yeah, thank you for organising.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, and my co-organizers, I should give.
And co-organisers too, yes. The whole
Co-organizers,
committee.
they're amazing. Kai, Nikki, and Danielle, and also to Christina and the AAH. So yeah, thank you very much, everybody. Yeah, very much appreciate it.
Thanks, everybody. Good luck.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. We need it. No, I'm joking. I do.
We
Thanks.
all need it. Right, I'm going to step out. Lovely to see you all.
All right,
Thanks again.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.